Alright, let's fucking go, y'all. Hello, interwebs, I hope you're all doing well because I am here to review the latest, 8th, and penultimate episode of Daredevil Born Again Season 1, this episode titled Isle of Joy, and oh boy, everybody, this episode was, by a hot freaking mile, easily the best episode of the season for me. Like, bar none, it really has no equivalent to any other episode this season. This was just absolutely fantastic front to back. I was riveted to my seat in every single moment. There were just so many scenes and beats that feel like they were great culminations, great revelations building upon a lot of the stuff that has been sort of going throughout this entire season and giving us some really great payoff and great character moments that just felt really juicy and fun in a way that I really just haven't been feeling the rest of this season. And I want to talk about why I've been feeling that way in a minute, because I want to address some of you in the comments, because there's been some interesting discourse in my comment section on my reviews of this series that I want to kind of dive into for a second. But it is very clearly telling to me that this episode is the one that I've really responded to, because this was the first episode created in the back half of the season that was whole cloth made by the new creative team that came into the show after Marvel executives looked at the first version of Daredevil Born Again and realized that it wasn't really working for them, so they sort of brought in a new creative team to reconfigure, reshoot the show, and they shot the first episode of this season whole cloth, and then this episode and the finale of the season, with everything else that we've been watching this season sort of being re-edited, reconfigured, and maybe just a few reshot scenes for those episodes to sort of smooth the transition into what these two final episodes are. And, you know, I sort of sat at the beginning of the season watching episode 1 and then episode 2 especially, sort of that dichotomy, that release that we got there, and I sort of felt very conflicted, because I saw what episode 1 was trying to do and try to create this good continuity from the Netflix show, but it felt like it was so wholly divorced from what episode 2 was kind of doing, even though there was obviously some tissue there with, you know, Fisk coming in as mayor and all of that jazz, but it just felt a little bit separate. And then we sort of settled into this rhythm that on its face I really love the pitch of, which is a sort of procedural show where it's just every week we get another like case of the week, or you know, the bank heist episode, or things like that we've been sort of watching with Daredevil. But I personally, while I love that as a structure and as an idea, I've just not been resonating a lot with the show, which has been interesting because every time that I've been reviewing this show, I've been getting a lot of comments from a bunch of you out there who have been feeling like I've been hating on the show. I actually got a comment last week being like, it feels really weird, Jesse, that you're continually finding reasons to hate upon this show and it feels out of character for you. That was interesting to me, because I feel like I have been kind of hopefully been clear as I've been reviewing this season that I haven't hated the show. There's actually been things every single week, even in episodes that I didn't really like all that much, that I've been trying to point out of like, I like this. I think in particular, the depiction of Fisk as a sort of strongman authoritarian type mayor, I thought was really well handled. But what's been missing for me is that a lot of the week by week stories have kind of felt not necessarily bad, but underwhelming. Like, to go back to that bank heist episode, not that it was a bad episode, and there were moments in that episode that I liked, such as bringing in Miss Marvel's dad, but it never really elevated above just the sort of standard tropes of a bank heist episode, right down to the cops wanting to bust in early and putting the hostages in danger in a way that felt like it was for no real reason other than it was just kind of a trope of the genre. And again, it wasn't necessarily bad, and there was some great acting and some great character beats within there, but they just didn't land for me. And then there's been other moments this season where, like the caramel corn guy episode that sort of gets brought up this episode, that felt like, all right, I like what you're doing here thematically, but it just feels a little bit on the nose and not really telling me an interesting story here. So I've loved the episodic nature of this show, but it just didn't quite land and didn't really elevate above a sort of bog standard thing, which has been interesting then to see the criticism that I've been getting of me reviewing this show. It feels like, and maybe I'm wrong in this, but it feels like a lot of people are responding positively to that kind of structure for the show, which I understand. It's something that we haven't really been getting from Marvel a lot lately, and we've kind of lost a lot of the like fun episodic superhero shows. Like, we don't even have the CW Arrowverse shows, which many thoughts on those shows, but they were like a fun sort of like, episode by episode of the week sort of thing that we haven't really gotten from Marvel really at all. And I feel like a lot of people are hungry for that and we're resonating with that for the show, of feeling like, okay, this is good, a comfortable show. And I certainly understand that. But for me, it's not been bad, but it's been so kind of aggressively middling, and I don't say that necessarily to like be hateful of the show, but it's just been like, okay, it's been fine. And so when I've been trying to criticize the show, I've been like looking for things that like I was really trying to dig into, discuss, but it's been hard. And I think that came across as like being hypercritical of the show, when really it's just me trying to find things to talk about when I haven't really been finding a ton to talk about with this show. So it's just been an interesting sort of relationship for me, because it's just been looking at, I think people responding to the idea of the show and enjoying like the nature of the show, but then me as a critic being like, I have to come in here and talk about this. There's not been a lot of meat on the bone for me, and it just felt like, okay, this is fine, but it's not great. Which brings me finally back to this episode, because looking at this, I'm like, oh my gosh, there is a ton of meat on this bone that I wish had been spread out better throughout the season, because so much here feels like it's all working in concert. We get some great climax, some great building on story beats, some great filmmaking, like some of the shots and artistry of the filmmaking in this, from the use of color and playing with color, even if it's a little bit on the nose, but like still in some fun and intriguing ways to bring us into Poindexter's point of view, was excellent. Now, I've been kind of talking around the bush around it. Let's actually get into some of the specifics here. Again, obviously, we come back into Poindexter, who is a character pulled right from the first episode of this season, and I was like, okay, good, we're finally getting some Bullseye here, and it was very clearly like, all right, the new showrunners kind of finally bringing him back in, and I loved his story being like, all right, he's put into Gem Pop, he's gonna get beaten the hell up. And I loved the visuals of us getting into his head with the blue lighting at those certain moments to sort of like get a perspective on how he feels about the world. Thought that was really fun. And I loved bumping over to Matt, who is just so clearly like just fucking done with the broken system and everything just faltering around him. And again, as much as I haven't liked some of the like beat by beat story of the past few episodes, that's an emotional arc that really tracked for me. And you can just see him just being like, I'm done, I'm over this. I loved it when he like called out his client being like, you're lying, and his fellow lawyer being like, this is malpractice, Matt. You can't do this way. And it felt like good camaraderie that I've been wanting between her and Matt in a way that I haven't really gotten a lot of this season. And it landed really well. Also, on a side note, that teacher who was there, what kind of person wears a like button-up shirt with that jacket on? It was such a weird ensemble for someone to wear. I'm like, of course that man's guilty. He's guilty of fashion crimes at the very least. So I love Matt just being like, I'm just trying to put a Band-Aid on a broken system. And again, I agree very heavily with that. And it's a storyline that speaks to the times right now that marries perfectly with the authoritarian strongman story of Fisk, right? Like, he's a man who's breaking the system to get it to do what he wants for him, and Matt's just sort of seeing how all of these things are culminating at once. Feels very relevant for today's political climate. So, like, all of that finally tracks, but it's coming out in a way that feels very character forward, and it gets me invested in like what Matt's feeling at these individual moments. To jump into a negative here, though, I think one of the things that does not work for me is like the only thing that really didn't work for me in this episode is Hannah, I believe is her name, the therapist that Matt's seeing that is also Fisk's therapist. And I've been trying to nail it down exactly why. And some people called me out last week, was critical of her being a bad therapist for like yelling at Muse, who was trying to kill her. And I get that. I get it. She's in a heightened moment where she's yelling at this guy who's trying to kill her. I understand that. And I guess what I'm trying to articulate here is like there's this judgmentalness to even outside of that moment with Muse that feels weird for a therapist character to have. Matt, like, they're about people wearing masks, they're just insecure boys sort of playing at being hero or something along those lines, which I think is an interesting perspective for her to have, and I think makes sense. And it's certainly, I absolutely love her point, calling out kind of Daredevil and Matt by proxy, saying like, no, Daredevil was there for himself, just as Muse is there for himself, and also kind of Fisk being there for himself. Just scared little boys just putting on masks, Fisk is putting on the mask of Mayor to just act out their what they want and try to get what they desire. And I'm like, yeah, perfect theme. But, and this is kind of what I was trying to say last week, it feels weird for that opinion to be coming out of a therapist character who typically, when we see therapist characters, they are generally less overtly judgmental and more, therapist, trying to figure out why people are acting that way instead of necessarily coming in and being like, oh, they're scared little boys and just acting like children. Like, it feels very aggressively judgmental. Now, do not get me wrong. I think that is fine for a character, even a therapist character, to have that kind of opinion. However, we have not really seen much of who she is as a character, outside of just her being someone that Matt talks to every once in a while and her being a bouncing board as the therapist for Fisk and Vanessa. And so when she expressed that opinion last week with Muse, and then again in this week's episode, I'm like, okay, that's just a perspective that she has that I think is very valid and very fine, but it just I didn't have any sense of where it came from and why she would have that perspective, or even like a sense that she had that perspective before it came up in a heated moment with Muse. The only other mention that we had of that was when she was talking to Matt about making a book about vigilantes that she was fascinated by. We didn't get really a sense of her opinion. So then all of a sudden in this heightened moment with Muse, she's like, yeah, you're just, a scared little boy hiding behind a mask. And like I get that she's yelling at a guy who's about to kill her, fine. But it's also now clearly like an opinion that she has, just generally. It just feels weird that never got built up in any way before, and it's just coming out in this heightened moment. So I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? It kind of aggressively leaps out at me and is now just a staple of her character. And so it just feels weirdly out of place for this type of character in a way that I'm like, not that again, you couldn't justify it, but I wish we had gotten some seeds of some character building for that, either just giving us where that opinion of hers comes from, or just like building it up in more subtle ways before it just suddenly blatantly becomes a moment of tension or a big climactic moment. It just feels like it's a payoff for something we didn't really get any build up to, and is now a central crux of a conflict point with her and Matt. And it just really overly emphasizes to me how much of a non-character she's really been up until this point, so that now when we see her throughout the rest of this episode, where she's confronting Matt correctly about him being not there for her, sort of him abandoning her. Like, I understand and empathize with where she's coming from, and I think she's perfectly correct. Matt is being an absolute dick to her and not supporting her, but it just doesn't feel like I've known her enough as a character. I haven't built up her relationship with Matt enough for me to care enough about their relationship falling apart, so that I'm just sort of like, all right, this is a big point of conflict and tension over a viewpoint that she has, as well as the fact that their relationship is falling apart because Matt's being a dick, but I don't have any investment in her as a character and why she would have that viewpoint. So it's just sort of like a conflict point for a conflict point's sake. Or also the relationship she has with Matt, so it's sort of like I don't really care too much about it deteriorating, even though she is correct in Matt being a dick with her, but I don't really feel anything for that relationship to be deteriorating other than like, yeah, Matt's being a dick. The other thing too is there's a little bit of continuity thing for me that feels weird, which is she's very angry at Matt for not wanting to go and support her at Fisk's dinner. Now, one, there's an ethical problem of like, therapists generally aren't supposed to go to public events for their clients. I get that he's the mayor and like want to support her, but there is an ethical thing with that generally, but whatever, we'll set that aside. That's not a big deal. TV shows are TV shows. The ethics rules are sometimes a little wishy-washy in terms of what you display. But more my issue is just sort of like, if we're following the continuity of the Netflix show, didn't Matt, and maybe I'm misremembering, didn't Matt very publicly prosecute Fisk or go after Fisk as Matt Murdock, not just Daredevil? So wouldn't she be aware of Matt having personal problems with Fisk? And even beyond that, just like Fisk is very clearly an authoritarian strongman type that Matt just politically seems like he disagrees with. So I could see him being like, I just don't want to see him, and being a dick, and I can see what she'd be angry at him now when he support her, but it's sort of like there's no sense of her having an understanding of who Matt is as a person, so that when they have arguments as a couple, that does not feel like it feels like it's just there to create conflict rather than it being a couple relationships falling apart. Like, she would have every right to be angry at Matt and say, you're being a dick, I want you to come and support me, put aside your feelings for Kingpin and support me. But that never really becomes like a moment of understanding between her and being like, I understand we have the perspective, but you're being a jerk, come support me. And it's just being like, like she just seems like she's being weirdly like demanding in a way that just doesn't feel natural, because again, she's not much of a character. She just seems to be there for an object for Matt to worry about, or a character to just have conflict with Matt, and not really being a full person on her own, just on her own terms. And as a result, that's why I'm kind of reacting against her. Now, to be very clear, that is the only negative I have for this episode, and it's just a general problem I have with the series. Her character just does not work for me. I want to be very clear. That's the one negative I'm going to have. Maybe you disagree on my depiction, my reading her character, but it's just she doesn't gel for me, and she doesn't really work for me in this episode. Everything else was great. Fisk was wonderful this episode, where he brings Vanessa to the person that she had relationships with while Fisk was away, and her just straight up murdering this guy. And I'm like, yeah, of course. And it's interesting because Fisk kind of puts her into that position. He kind of forces her hand on that, because what else is she gonna do? Is she gonna let him go? He could tell on Fisk and like ruin everything for her and Fisk. So of course she's going to do that. And so it was an interesting moment, but it was also sort of this like nice sort of bringing them together in their relationship, and like, oh, now they're a team again, which is very fun when we get to the end of the episode and Matt realizes it was actually Vanessa the whole time who sent Poindexter to kill Foggy. And I loved that sort of building thing of like, oh, like Foggy, someone sent someone to Poindexter to kill Foggy. It wasn't just Poindexter acting out of revenge. And I'm like, okay, obviously it would be Fisk, but it's actually Vanessa. And I thought that was just such a wonderful twist that gives Vanessa so much more agency within this story, rather than sort of being a passive person who has sort of stepped aside for Fisk and being kind of frustrated with Fisk. Like, no, she gets to be front and center with that, and I love that twist and revelation. Like, makes perfect sense, and yet I didn't initially see it coming. Love that, and I thought that was just a really clever twist. I also really loved Matt's confrontation with Poindexter at Rikers. And sort of Matt just saying, I'm not going to get you out. I want to know this information. Poindexter's like, you got to get me out of here, man. And I love these points that Poindexter is making, like, oh, it's like a zoo in there. Or him saying to Matt, like, isn't that what good people do, protect their worst enemies? And I love how Poindexter thinks he's talking about him, but eventually that comes all back around at the end, where, you know, him talking about it being a zoo in Rikers and everyone's just sort of fighting each other, predator and prey. And it's this, when there's that dance sequence in the party later, we get a song playing where they're talking, where the song is something about the zoo or whatever, and it brings to mind that same idea, predator prey. It's the same thing between Matt and Kingpin. They see each other as predator and prey, back and forth. That sort of very us versus them mentality that Matt himself has fallen into, because he's constantly going up against this guy. He's only thinking on Kingpin's terms because he just wants to face off against Kingpin. I love that. That again, it gets at that very understanding of like the fascist kind of style authoritarian mentality where everyone becomes an us versus them, and how Matt has fallen into that very same trap and bringing it up with Poindexter, and Poindexter even pointing out like, no, you should be like a good person, like actually tries to do the right thing, not just focusing on taking down the guy. And I love that comes back around when Poindexter escapes and tries to kill Kingpin, and Matt's the one that steps in to try to save him. Like, theming was so good, but it wasn't just theming like in past episodes. Like, it was built into good character beats, subtle theming. It wasn't on the nose of the character giving us a big speech about like, I stole the karma cord and the system is bad. Like, it was subtle and yet all there and just smartly done. And just when you know Matt steps in front and saves Kingpin's life from the shot, I'm like, boom, works. Beautifully. Like, I'm actually excited about this episode. Like, first time I've been like pumped about the show, because I'm like, this is really, really good stuff. Speaking of the party though, I really, really loved how it was all filmed. Like it wasn't a one-take shot. We got some cuts in there, but I loved how we weaved throughout the party and got to go to different people. I loved Daniel and BB, because I actually watched this episode with my fiance, and we were sitting there being like, I love this episode, but the one thing I really don't get here is I don't get BB as a character, right? And I was sitting here being like, what does she see in Daniel? Like, Daniel's using her, and it seems like the show is kind of building BB up to be like, have a kind of romance with Daniel, and I'm like, she feels like she's, again, going back to some political, like, it feels like Daniel's not the kind of guy, like a young Republican guy that she's gonna want to hang out with, especially since her dad was the reporter from the original Daredevil show. Like, it just doesn't seem like he's the kind of dude that she would want to. So I was like, I don't buy that relationship at all. So then when she goes and meets with just has that little side conversation with the head of the police chief, and I'm like, oh, now I understand her character. Like, I could have guessed that, and I was hoping that's where it was going to go, but like, finally it came together in that scene. And I love the connection that she made when he's like, when did you become the mouthpiece of propaganda for the mayor? She said, at the same time you became the head of his SS, the task force. And it's like pointing out both of them are being used by Fisk. Like, they don't want to be, but they're both being used in the same way, and they both kind of want to take him down. So I was like, get that. And I can see that she's just playing Daniel. She's using him as much as he thinks that he's using her. And just very, very smart. Loved that. Speaking of the task force, I did like all of the elements that we finally got with that, where we hear the mayor said of Fisk say, the ACLU is filing stuff against us, and like, no, but excessive force gets things done. Like, he's, again, that sort of strong man, I can do what I want, don't care about people's rights, do whatever. And that plays out later on, because I was saying to my fiance, he's like, I wish we had gotten to see that more. We haven't really seen the task force do anything. And while I wish we had seen something of that in previous episodes, or maybe them like taking down a vigilante or something, I guess it's implied that they don't make it clear at any point, but it's sort of implied, I guess, that they're the ones who killed White Tiger back in episode 3 or 4 or whatever it was. So I think the implication is that the people who are now in the task force are those same guys. Wish they had made that connection more explicit, but still, there it is. So like, them, I wish we gotten to see that a little bit more, but I liked at the end, they see them roughing up that reporter, and then the police chief having to step in and like, basically like, nope, we're going to do what we want. There is an element of me that wishes, this is something Marvel was never going to do. And I'm liking how it's being on more understanding a systemic level elsewhere, but there's a level of me being like, man, I wish we could a little bit have seen that sort of like, cop brotherhood mentality that we get to see, where like, even cops because there's this thing within cops that they'll like stay silent, protect each other, even if they're not the ones causing the problem. Like, there are some cops more than, like, all cops are bastards, but there are some cops who are going to use more excessive force than others, and yet all cops will be willing to cover for other cops in order to sort of protect each other, even ones who are the ones consider them the good ones. That's how the systemic problem works. And again, all cops are bastards, but there is like interesting levels, but it is how it works all systemically for cops to sort of have that like brotherhood of like, we'll protect each other, even the ones who we consider assholes. And we don't get that in this place. So we kind of, the way, and it makes sense the police chief would be the one like, I want to stay on the level, fuck these guys. There's some understanding there to a degree, but I wish we had kind of gotten a little bit of the depiction of that as well. Like, maybe even, like the police chief even saying like, I'm not going to sell out my own guys, even though I want the task force to be done with. So like, I just some level of that, but again, that's Marvel was never going to go full ACAB, unfortunately. It's just me being me. So, this is as close as we're ever going to get, and for Marvel, it's actually saying some shit, so I'm not going to complain too hard. Just a little nuance in there that I'm like, okay. Love Fisk sort of blackmailing the swordsman. Excellent use of him from Hawkeye and everything going on there. So loved that. Thought that was a great pull for Hawkeye. I know he appeared in a previous episode, but it was like a nice way to bring this up and sort of make this sort of vigilante hunt feel bigger than just Daredevil going on here, because that is one interesting thing. Like, Fisk talks about vigilantes being a huge problem, and we have seen White Tiger. But outside of White Tiger, and I guess Spider-Man, technically, is in New York City, there aren't, to my awareness, a ton of New York City level vigilantes. I guess we're still taking into account the Netflix continuity. It would be like Jessica Jones is still around, and so is Iron Fist and Luke Cage. There's no mention of them, though. I wish we had a mention of them, just to make it feel like there's the fleshed out problem of the vigilantes that Fisk is dealing with, because it's sort of like told and not heard. And bringing in the Hawkeye character at least makes that feel like there is that. But it almost feels like this would have been stronger if we had gotten some more explicit Defenders kind of style references. to sort of pull from. But that being said, considering I'm sure Marvel would not let them do that for probably rights reasons or deciding still what they want to do with those characters, the Hawkeye pull works great for that, and I think he's a lot of fun and is a fun sort of play, and someone in the same world as Fisk that other vigilante characters would not necessarily be. So excellent work there. We land, I just want to sort of reemphasize this, and I've talked about this a little bit already, but like Bullseye escaping, fantastic. Like it's a little unrealistic, it's actually very unrealistic of him like shooting the tooth out and killing the guard and escaping, but I'm like, you know what, it's superhero stuff, loved it, it was very cool and fun, and the tension rising in the party scene, again, the filmmaking was great, and we get the shot from above, and like just all the visuals, like the cinematography in this episode was fantastic. But the tension of that scene where Matt sort of like they're dancing and he's sort of weaving in and like steals Vanessa and like confronts her in the dance, and Fisk is about to reveal like who Matt actually is to his girlfriend. Like that was such a great rising tension and great confrontation. And I love Fisk speaking to Matt under his breath while they're dancing, knowing he can hear him. Like all of that just worked so fantastically. Felt like just very fun filmmaking, very fun moments that I feel like the show hasn't had as much of, like those fun like beats and tensions rising, all culminating in, again, what I've already talked about, Matt stepping in front of the bullet for Fisk, giving us a really powerful ending to this episode. This was, it's not clear, I have my quibbles and quabbles and issues, but this was, again, by far the very first episode of the show that I've actually been like, this is not only interesting, but like excellent and very well done. And I certainly will acknowledge, like, this is building off of everything that has come before in the season in a way that pays it off really well. And I think that that's going to make the rest of the season kind of like go up in my estimation, even though I haven't loved the beat by beat episodes. I think, again, I didn't hate them. I don't think there's an episode this season that I've like despised, but they've been fairly standard. But this is taking all those pieces, the probably mess of a show that they had to like cobble together. I mean, I don't think the show was probably fine when it was made by the first creative team, but now having watched them, like, okay, I can see how it would have been just like, okay, and now how they've sort of restructured it to try and pay off in this way. And it probably was a very difficult task, but I think they're really pulling it off, and it makes me actually excited to go into the finale of this show. So that's my thoughts on this episode of Daredevil Born Again. What a fantastic recovery into the final few episodes here. I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you think about, my theory on, why some of you have been reacting to my reviews in an interesting way? Because, like I said, I'm not like angry about people being like, oh, Jessie, you must hate the show, even though I don't think that that's my read. It's just, it's an interesting thing to me about how some of you have been reading my reviews of the show. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that just intrigues me. So I'm trying to figure out, like, maybe where the miscommunication or the different perspectives are. It just interests me. So I'll be curious your thoughts on that too. But what did you think of this episode? Did y'all? I feel like, given my luck on how this gets reviewed, I'm gonna love this one, and everyone in the internet is gonna be like, "This is the worst episode ever." I despise it. That just might be how things go. But regardless, it's always fun. I'm here just to enjoy the conversation and enjoy what you think, and just talk with y'all about my thoughts to your thoughts, and really kind of tying that together with my final going out. Because in the words of Spock, who also says, "My mind to your mind," I hope y'all live long and prosper. Mwah.